Hi, this is Denise with healinghacker.com, and today we're here with Moises Velasquez-Manoff, and Moises is the author of An Epidemic of Absence, uh,
Yay!
which in my opinion should be required reading for anyone who is pregnant, thinking about getting pregnant, obstetricians, pediatricians, because, and I think if you read the book, you'll see there's so many important gateways that happen both prenatally and when a child is first born that I think it should be required reading. And then also required reading for the usual suspects, anyone who's dealing with allergies, asthma, or any sort of autoimmune disease, all the way up to even potentially cancer patients. So thanks for talking with me today, Moises.
My pleasure.
Why don't we just jump in? I would love for you to start with, tell us your story, what led you to the book, and also what led you to self-infect with helminths.
So I was, let's see, I've been food allergic for as long as I can remember, asthmatic for as long as I can remember. I'm allergic to peanuts, sesame. When I was a kid, I was allergic to eggs, and I grew out of that one, thankfully. And then around age 11, I developed a bald spots on my head that sort of progressed to total hair, almost my entire body losing hair. It's a kind of autoimmune disorder where your immune system attacks your hair follicles. And so I've always been curious for these reasons and many more as to what had gone wrong with my immune system in particular, and also why no one could really explain it besides, they had these sort of, they would just basically blow you off with these explanations like, oh, it's stress or what have you, things that just did not ring, didn't seem to resonate. So then as a science writer, I started looking into it, and it's really, I guess, it was almost 10 years ago I started looking into it, and what I discovered was basically that all these diseases have increased. There's very good evidence that they've increased over the last, half a century. And the truth is, we say over the last half a century, but really started increasing in the late 19th century. They started sort of popping up and becoming worse than them then. And the reason we say from the last half century is because it's hard to have reliable statistics before that, because there's world wars going on and people weren't paying close attention. But there are these like windows where you can sort of see past World War II, and you could see that there was this more gradual increase going on in the early part of the 20th century as well. I mean, hay fever was like an epidemic in New York City in the 1920s, and in the late 19th century as well. Anyways, so I discover all this stuff. They're increasing. People don't understand why, and then there's this emerging idea that it has to do, sometimes called the hygiene hypothesis, that it has to do with the fact that we are too clean. And I have to qualify what cleanliness means. It means exposure to certain parasites, bacteria, and just sort of like innocuous microbes in our environment, maybe also changes to the microbes that live in our intestinal tract. And it does not mean not taking enough showers, and it definitely does not mean exposure to the things that we're vaccinated for, which keep us alive. Like, there's no indication that measles protects against anything, or that smallpox does, or any of those old things, those scourges of humanity. Those things are horrific. We don't need those. We don't need common colds. We don't need the flu. None of that stuff is protective. We're talking about other stuff that's much older, actually, in the human body. So I discover all this. I write the book. Parasites are a huge part in the sense that there's this pretty consistent inverse correlation where you observe people who have chronic parasite infections with certain parasites, not all parasites, but certain parasites. These are parasites, of course, live in the intestinal tract and other places in the body, but mostly we're talking about ones that live in the intestinal tract. And I come across this sort of nascent underground movement that is informed by actual science going on. Even scientists, I find, have self-infected with one particular, it's considered very nasty among usual sort of more standard parasitologists, the hookworm necator americanus. So hookworms take this voyage through your body. They go through your skin, go through your lungs, and your bloodstream. They go in your bloodstream, come out your lungs, plop down into your stomach, and latch onto your small intestine over like a few weeks. So, and they're usually associated with anemia and stunting and like mental retardation, all this horrible stuff. But anyways, they have this really strong, powerful potentially powerful anti sort of allergic effects. There are scientists infecting themselves in the UK to test the possibility of preventing allergy with these parasites. This whole underground movement has taken place, and so one day I decided to go join it. It's a kind of like gonzo reporting to go sort of test the whole idea. Stop listening to to all these people who are saying they're great, to other people who are saying they're horrible, and find out for myself. And so I go down to Mexico. There's like a little clinic. It's pretty professional. It's an American guy who's running it. I get what I'm told was 30 hookworm larvae. They go on a patch right there on the inner arm. You feel the itching. And after that, you feel I felt a little bit lightheaded, but who knows if that's because I was like freaked out, thinking, what the hell did I just do to myself? And then you go through this sort of odyssey of intestinal pain and like headaches, and they slowly subside. And then my hay fever disappeared for a few months. But it was not, it was really interesting. It was like pretty amazing, actually. My eczema had disappeared, but it was not at all consistent. Like it was, for a month it was totally gone, and suddenly it just came roaring back, and then it's gradually disappeared again. And, ask some more questions. I mean, I'll just keep blabbering on and on. So.
Well, but ultimately you decided to discontinue your experiment. Can you talk about why? Yeah. What led you to that point?
I think I hosted the parasites for like a year and a half or something, and their power to affect positive change on me seemed to gradually subside. And maybe that's because your colony, as the people in the underground like to call it, slowly members die off, and the sort of community, the power of your community of parasites to do something to your immune system wanes, and what you're left with were the negative symptoms, which were pretty negative, like sort of a dull pain in your intestines, and just what you could describe as the hookworm malaise, which in the early part of the 20th century, sort of like the whole southeastern region of the country was infected with hookworms. And it was this huge campaign to get rid of hookworms because it was seen as like economically retarding the whole country because these people were just wasting away. They were very poor. I mean, we forget how poor. We were a developing country. It was just like what you'd see in any what we call third world country now. It was barefoot people, lousy latrines, poop all over the place, animals running around, spreading it around, and just all these like listless, unhappy, wasting people that it wasn't good. Once they discovered it was hookworm and they could cure it, there was this massive campaign. And mostly, actually, the campaign was effective less because of deworming. They used thymol back then, which is a derivative from the thyme plant, which is an herb. Mm-hmm. But they used huge amounts, and it could be pretty nasty. It was toxic.
They used what?
So
what was that?
It was thymol, which comes from thyme.
Yeah.
The herb, which we use in cooking, but very concentrated amounts, and I guess you would imbibe rather large amounts, and it was just really unpleasant. Kids hated it. They also gave you, I think, Epsom salts. So the idea was to kill to paralyze the parasite with a thymol, and then flush it out with a diuretic. And this is way before any modern sort of antibiotic, anti-helminthic. So, that sort of worked, but people hated taking it, and a few people died from the treatment itself. And what really, really seemed to help was just getting people to build outhouses the right way and to like to stop the ancient practice of night soil. Do you know what night soil is? It's just taking their poop and spreading it in the fields. It's great fertilizer, right? But it just causes this constant cycle of reinfection.
And you opted, I mean, when you're talking about the symptoms waning a year and a half in, you opted to not do, because I know that for some of the people that do it, what they'll do is they periodically will take that as a sign of, oh, it's time to rebuild my colony and, redose.
Yeah.
And you opted to not do that.
No, I mean, my symptoms had never gone away, and I didn't want to live. Like, honestly, my hairlessness, which did not hardly got any better, maybe a few extra hairs came out, is not a big concern to me. What I was more curious was if I could lose my allergies to peanuts. That would have been great, or sesame. That would have been fantastic. That really didn't happen. And there was actually this scientist or a doctor, MD or something, a British guy who self-infected in the UK. He has this whole video documentary of it. And he lost his allergies to wheat. But I don't know if you've seen it, but if he's videos himself throughout the process, and he just looks awful. Like at day 20, he just looks like he's been hit by a truck. And that's kind of how you feel a little bit. And so I interviewed people who had no side effects. I found given my own experience, I find this to be rather remarkable.
Yeah.
They could take like 50 hookworm larvae and hardly feel anything. But part of what makes you feel bad is your own immune response. Like your fight against the parasites is part of the pain that you're feeling. And so everyone's different. Everyone's immune system. The aspect of our genome, the parts of our genome that deal with the immune response, it's the most diverse part, or one of the most diverse parts of the human genome, because we needed to have a lot of diversity to deal with pathogens and parasites in the past to survive them. So everyone is different in how their immune system responds. So my immune response just it never arrived at any sort of like understanding with the parasites. I was always in constant war with them, and I felt like it. And so it was a firm hell no to ever doing that again.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, finish what you were saying.
So all the information that you just alluded to about people who redosing and this and that, it's very, you have to be careful what you read on the internet about these underground movements, because there's only one point of view that's being represented, really. I've been part of some of these chat rooms where people discuss this stuff long enough to know that, like, any dissenting view is sort of smacked down by other participants. Like, there's almost this weird cult-like mentality where if you didn't see a positive effect, it's your fault. You didn't do it long enough. You didn't do enough. You killed them off. It's like, as opposed to the more likely possibility that it just doesn't work. That this hasn't been shown to work. They've actually tested it in humans in the UK. A bunch of hapless scientists dose themselves. There's a whole sort of rumor mill around that those studies which were published out of the University of Nottingham, where these scientists were dosed themselves with different doses, and I guess the rules changed after that regarding what you could ask of your fellow scientists, because I guess it didn't want to. I'm not really sure. This is all hearsay. I shouldn't even say it. But anyways, that has a legacy as well. It seems like that's going on.
Let me ask you this: when you say that you didn't lose your allergies to sesame and peanuts, how did you test that at all? And how did
accidentally? I did. Yeah, I did on purpose with my sesame allergy. Just like chewing on a sesame seed. So that's the less severe one that I have.
Yeah.
And so I just chew a sesame seed and leave it in my mouth. It didn't help really. Maybe it muffled it a tiny bit, but not really. And then the peanut one is my more severe allergy. That happened accidentally, where I ate something that had peanuts in a dessert, and it was just the same old ejection from both ends, basically, is my response to peanuts, and lots of abdominal pain. And it happened.
Yeah. Oh, that's a bummer. So, given the journey and the experience and stuff, why did you choose to write the book?
Well, because I still, the book is about this sort of body of evidence suggesting, really pointing towards a new way to think about the emergence of these diseases in modern populations, and really indicating what will, in the future, may be the avenue of prevention, which will be probiotics that are applied proactively, preventively throughout life. And at this point, I'm not sure, I highly doubt that we're actually going to see a parasite as a preventive probiotic, but more sort of traditional seeming probiotics might apply, just microbes basically, um, or even microbial products, dead microbes that just stimulate your immune system. But it seems like our immune system needs a certain kind of stimulation of a certain amount uh, as it develops. Otherwise, it does not develop properly. And so the key is to get in those windows. And it's like if you see those disaster movies of where there are comets or like asteroids heading towards Earth, it's like the point to intervene is when they're really, really far away. All you have to do is nudge them like an inch, and then they'll miss Earth. But once they get too close, it's too late. You need like a nuclear bomb to even have any hope of having an effect. And that's kind of like what these diseases are like. You need to really have preventive action very early on. And that means in this case, probably before your parents even conceive you. Honestly, the maternal microbiome is very important, but the paternal ones that end up being important as well, because it just hasn't been studied as much because it's not as obviously important. But it leaves an imprint, an epigenetic imprint that can be conveyed by sperm. What the microbes in your dad, how they affect your dad's metabolism and immune system. They're going to imprint. It's going to be carried to some degree by sperm, or even and by like other. There are cytokines and these are immune system signaling molecules in seminal fluid. There's all sorts of this whole conveyance of environmental conditions that obviously happens in moms who have kids, but it also happens in fathers to some degree. And so this is how I sort of foresee treatment happening, is that it'll happen proactively with your parents before you're born, and it'll follow you throughout life proactively, sort of, and disease will never emerge. That would be the ideal. But the only way you can really even approach this project is by understanding what might have gone wrong. And so this book that I wrote is one view that's emerging. It's still, I think there's a lot of evidence supporting it, but it's still hypothetical. There's still holes. I don't really talk about endocrine disruptors in the book, for example. In some ways it'd be much simpler if all our problems were due to endocrine disruptors, because then you could just get rid of them all. That's a much easier problem to address. Taking into account, of course, there'll be corporate resistance to even, you can imagine a whole battle like there was against the idea that smoking was bad for you taking place with endocrine disruptors, because there's a huge money interest there. But it'd be fantastic if I was wrong and it was just endocrine disruptors or toothpaste or chlorine in water or whatever. If it was something that we introduced in modernity that was easy to take away, I actually prefer that scenario to the one I propose, because the one I propose is just immensely complicated. And how are you going to test it? It needs to be tested on humans. It needs to be, so you have to move from mice, where it's pretty much shown to be very, very true, from parasites to microbes to what have you. You have to move to monkeys and then to people, and it's just so immensely complicated.
Plus, I think that, at least from what I've read in the microbiome sort of sphere, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's missing. Some of the things that we've already gotten rid of, we don't even know that we've gotten rid of them. And I think that when you talk about, even your experience with the hookworm, it's possible that part of what you needed was to be in an environment where hookworm is part of the whole spectrum. It's not just taken out of context all by itself. There's a whole host of other bacteria and potentially parasites that go along with it that might, it itself maybe needs some sort of symbiotic massaging.
Yeah, it's possible, but it's also possible, and I think likely, that hookworm just stinks for some people. Yeah. Even if you're in that environment. There are these, if you look at a population that carries hookworm, there will be people who are very sick and have horrible symptoms because of it, and there will be people who don't. And there's some percentage of the population that it always works out that way, and that's again because we have immense genetic diversity in those genes that encode for our immune response, partly. Now, to your point, one of my suspicions is that, again, it's very different if you grow up with chronic parasite infections as opposed to being someone who never encountered them and then in adulthood throwing them in. Your immune system, if you grow up with chronic parasite infections and all that other stuff that comes along with it, which is like a sort of a diversity of bacteria that we evidently don't have in the developed world. Like, there are some recent studies from the Yanomami in Venezuela. These are like this very remote tribe of Native Americans. They only just recently discovered this particular group, so they went and sampled their microbiome, and they had half again as many species of microbes as we in the West have. So 50% more microbes as we have. I mean, that's pretty immense difference right there. Pretty immense. And those populations in the Amazon are like 90% parasitized. I mean, that's not an accurate assessment. I don't remember what the number was from that paper, or even if they had it in that paper. But they're very, very highly parasitized with hookworms and various other things. So it's hard to know what the interplay is there. They also have Helicobacter pylori, which on its own may be protective against some of these diseases, but which also, seems to correlate with an increased risk of cancer and ulcers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've read about the H. pylori, and it is interesting because there is supposedly an inverse correlation between an H. pylori infection and asthma. But then, like you said, there are certain virulent strains and certain strains that are linked to an increase in stomach cancer. So it's like, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, well, part of it may be what Martin Blaser says. He's the sort of Helicobacter pylori guy, which is that these diseases emerge late in life. The diseases like cancer, and not necessarily ulcers, but cancer anyways. So in the olden times, people didn't live that long, so maybe this was never available to be selected against as one of the consequences of having a relationship with this bacterium, right? Which is like basically eating away at the lining of your stomach constantly throughout your life and irritating it. But there are other factors too shown by the animal studies, which is like if you get it really early in life, your immune response to it is more tolerant. So it's really your own sort of irritation that leads to the cancer or to the ulcers. So maybe that doesn't happen to the same degree. Parasite infections may also protect against the carcinogenic aspects of Helicobacter pylori, and those are common in the past. There was also this really interesting study done that came out since my book was published, where they looked at so I think I mentioned this in the book, but there are Native American strains in South America of Helicobacter pylori that came over with the Proto-Americans over the Beringian land bridge, 15,000 years ago, or whatever the current dates are for that. So these are very different than the African and European strains, which were also introduced to South America. But the African and European strains outcompete the native strains. Like when they both end up in the stomach, it's those that the invasive strains triumph. So this more recent study looked at the sort of your background in terms of your ethnicity, or actually be more accurate to say your genetic background in terms of what group you come from, like Amerindian Amerindian, African, European, that kind of thing, and then what strain you harbored. And what they found was that if you were Amerindian and you harbored the African strain, your risk of stomach cancer was much, much higher than if you were Amerindian and you harbored the Amerindian strain. So it was like the mismatch between this imported strain, which in this case, a lot of them were from Africa, and this is like its own story. Actually, they're Spanish. Some of them are Spanish strains, but Spanish people have an African strain for reasons that have to do with maybe their own history and the fact that they were ruled for 700 years by people from North Africa. So that already there you have another colonization event. Anyways, the broader point is that part of the risk of gastric cancer may have to do with the fact that you have a strain of Helicobacter pylori that's not your mom strain. It's not your native strain. It's not the strain that co-evolved with your people, from long ago.
It's so there's so much there. It's completely overwhelming to even begin to think on that level. Like when you're talking about different strains and just thinking of your helminth infection, It's super complicated. I can see that, and we've obliterated a lot of things that now we don't know how to get them back properly, and so there's a lot of square peg and a round hole sort of going on. But can you talk about the key windows? Something that you said, the way that you see treatment happening, it's almost like before you're born. But talk about windows after you're born, because in the sort of epigenetics of things. Like, you have a genetic structure, but what you have are the epigenetic turning things on and off. So what sort of windows happen after you're born?
Well, I think the best case study of the possibility of intervention without causing harm comes from the farm studies in Europe. So, they live in a developed world. They live in Germany and Switzerland, and some of the studies are now from Denmark and Finland. They live in the developed world. They benefit from all modern medicine, but these kids have a much lower rate of allergic disease and asthma as they grow up. And so they did this woman at Bianca Schaub, she's in Germany, but I don't remember the institution. Anyway, she did these studies on looking at the blood at birth in the cord, in the umbilical cord, and how it correlated to exposure to animals of the mothers. So these are farming mothers.
Yeah.
So you can see a whole sort of different epigenetic profile in these mothers who are basically exposed to manure and feed and all this stuff. It's all the stimulation of their immune system, but it's like stimulation by innocuous microbes. You might consider this like an environmental probiotic. But it's definitely having an effect. You can see upregulation of one thing and downregulation of another. And so this effect seems to, when these mothers who work while they're pregnant, which is interesting, but who are milking cows and in this microbially enriched environment while they're pregnant, they have kids, their kids' immune systems are already different at birth. So they've been pre-programmed in a way that seems to prevent allergic disease. And it's the kids who are exposed earliest who are most protected. If you look at the kids who start exposure like 2 and 5 and so on, those kids whose mothers worked while they were pregnant, which is really a kind of exposure they're experiencing in utero. They're being pre-programmed. Their immune system is being formed under the sort of, like if you consider this to be a sort of background noise, their immune system is being educated in the context of this particular background noise of the farm environment. It's those kids who are exposed earliest to that who are the least allergic. And then it's the next sort of segment is like the kids who start getting exposure at age 3. I mean, I don't remember the exact age brackets. You have to look at the studies, but it's been a few years. But this is the idea. And then at some point, exposure doesn't seem to help anymore. And that most people say like by age 2, the first 2 years of life really matter. I would include first 9 months in that as well. So 2 years plus the 9 months in utero matter. Actually, let me correct myself. There was this really interesting study that came out, I think it was last year, on adults who took up farming in Denmark. And what they found was that the moment they took up farming, their allergies that they already had did not go away, but they stopped developing new allergies. Whereas the control group who didn't farm, they would sort of continuously get more sensitized to various pollen and stuff. So it does seem to have a sort of protective effect on adults, but it doesn't have an ability to reverse what's already gone wrong.
Got it.
This is the farm environment.
You almost need like a little bottle where you can capture all those microbes.
Yeah.
Give it to pregnant mothers as an inhaler, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's exactly what I think will happen. And what's great about the farm case studies is that you don't have the sort of additional oral fecal infections that no one really wants to reintroduce. Like, it's almost like you have just this pure possibility of an all good probiotic, as opposed to like there's the research from the Russian and Finnish side of that region, Russian and Finnish parts of this region called Karelia, where it's in Russia they have a lot more oral fecal infections. And it's not necessarily farming there. They just have a lot more microbial exposures. They drink water that's not untreated. But they also have these other things that we really don't want, like hepatitis A. They actually have Helicobacter pylori, a lot of that. They have various viral infections. So, like, is it really those? Is it just the innocuous microbes? It's hard to say, but then you look at the farming stuff and you say, wait a minute, they don't have the oral fecal stuff. They have just sort of microbial stimulation from cow dung, or what have you. And if we get that in a bottle, it'd be great. In fact, they're starting to, they've isolated some microbes from these cow sheds, and they're experimenting with them on mice, and they're able to reproduce that protective effect that they see in pregnancy. They spray pregnant mice, and the pups come out less allergic, and it changes the whole sort of profile of gene expression at the placenta, and all this interesting stuff happens. So,
wow. But I also wonder with the adults, not that I'm trying to go back in time, but I also wonder with the adults, like if you continuously, like obviously if they're not getting new allergies, their immune system's being modulated in a way that you do it long enough, maybe you can start to bring down some of what's already there. I don't know, just I'm always looking.
Yeah, right. Like, you need hope, and I think the fact that that immunotherapy works, like the sort of the injections, where they give you a little bit of allergen that they build you up, that works. So what that tells you is that it is possible to re-educate the immune system that has already developed a bunch of bad habits. It is possible. It just takes a really, really long time, and I hate needles, And there's the other option now with the sublingual stuff, which actually I'm trying, and it seems to have helped with this past hay fever season. But what that tells you is your immune system can be re-educated. It's just that the idea that you can use, so now I'm remembering there was a study from Australia where they used probiotics and peanut protein.
Oh, that was pretty recent. Yeah,
that was recent. So that seemed to accelerate the desensitization.
Yeah, but I think...
So there you go. There's an example. If they can replicate that, it'd be great.
Yeah, agreed. I think, though, and I think it was in your book that you talk about if they had exposure to a certain bacteria before getting exposed to, say, pollen, it actually was protective as opposed to first the pollen and then the bacteria.
Yeah, right.
So what can we glean, hopefully, what sort of hope can be gleaned from your book or action items or anything? Because I agree with you that, and you make a strong case for it, that a lot of it is in utero. And then the first 2 years and 9 months, what can someone beyond that range, what can we take away from the book that inspires us to move forwards?
Well, just the fact that there is a cohesive hypothetical explanation, which is what I explored in the book, that people take seriously. Some people take seriously. I'm continually surprised by the number of people I interview who have never heard of half of this stuff. But that, what I hoped the book would have done, and I think maybe to some degree it has, but not as much as I would have liked, is that there would be like some place at NIH where they would say, you know what, this idea is important. Let's get a bunch of different experts under one roof here: parasitologists, microbiologists, allergists, immunologists, developmental biologists, some people who know about evolutionary biologists. Get them all together and brainstorm this and figure out a sort of cohesive approach to testing these hypotheses, which hasn't really happened. I mean, science always moves more slowly than I'd like.
Yeah.
But some of the studies that are just coming out, it's like the hypotheses aren't as refined as they could be. Maybe they're not as aware of some of the literature as they should be, some of the people writing these papers. And this is the problem with science generally, is that people are very siloed. They're very concentrated in their particular specialty. And as you know from reading the book, that this hypothesis is sort of straddles many different disciplines. And it's sort of like you need to get everyone together It would be awesome if there was some sort of, I mean, the chronic disease is what what we suffer from now. It's not infectious disease. You know, ignoring HIV and ignoring like the antibiotic resistant bugs, which are very scary. But right now, we're all going to be killed by chronic disease, most likely in the developed world, and our lives are more importantly going to be made excruciatingly miserable by chronic disease. I mean, this is what we have to deal with. So why is there not some sort of and there are. The NIH has, you know, various subspecialties, but there should be a sort of attempt, in my view, to test this, what is really an evolutionary hypothesis, what some people call Darwinian medicine, to test it in this framework, because that's where the answer is going to come from. It's not necessarily going to be that we all give each other worms again, but if it's true that parasites prevent the disease, we have to figure out a way to replicate that, and that our immune system expects that stimulus. We have to replicate it without doing the damage. Or, you know, William Parker has this idea that we're going to domesticate helminths, you know, so that they'll be like, which is what TSO kind of was, but it doesn't seem to be working. But that, you know, I like to compare it to the wolf and the dogs. Like, dogs and wolves are genetically very similar, but you have a Chihuahua on one hand, and then you have this ferocious, like 150-pound gray wolf on the other. They're genetically very close, but what's happened is that one has undergone this generations and generations of selection for like nice qualities that we love. So we get all the things that we love, that we need really out of the species, which is a predator. We shouldn't forget, which is basically camaraderie at this point, and goofiness, right? I mean, that's what we get out of our dogs, is camaraderie and love, like unconditional love. So if we could do the same thing to parasites, and domesticate them in a way that all that they would give would be good stuff and none of the bad stuff. And I can tell you there's plenty of bad that comes along with having a parasite infection. That's an interesting idea, but it's still very, very hypothetical at this point, and I sort of doubt it's going to work, even though if you are interested in pursuing these interviews, you should talk to this one guy, this one Czech parasitologist who infected himself with a tapeworm that's like 30 feet long or something, and he has no symptoms. So tapeworms are interesting because they sort of just sit there, and they're huge, but they don't. Hookworms are like eating you. Tapeworms are not really eating you. They're eating what you eat, I guess. Or it's unclear what they're getting.
Is he emaciated from that? Because isn't that what they do? They do eat what you eat. I mean, they're lining your entire.
Yeah. Well, we overeat in the developed world anyway, so we have plenty of nutrients. He has no effect. He doesn't even know it's there. He said he ate a bunch of garlic one day, and like a 3-foot length came out, like because it died. You know, But besides that, he's had no. And he just did it to prove that some of these, what we consider to be parasites, maybe should be better considered to be commensals or even mutualists. I mean, that's what he's trying to show.
Well, and you talk about this in the book as well. I mean, just with and I'm probably not going to. I'm going to get some of the facts mixed up, so just correct me. But even with malaria infection and the whole idea that the people that would have the immune response that was most significant could almost like blow themselves up. And so, like your experience with the hookworm, it's possible that your immune system is one of those immune systems that's just like, at least with the hookworm, it almost wants to blow itself up.
It's possible, yeah. That was, David Pritchard, the guy who sort of came up with this whole idea that hookworm might be protective. He basically found that in Papua New Guinea, where he did his research, that the people who had the strongest allergic response were the ones who had the fewest hookworms. So it's in support of that idea. And then there was those two Australian gastroenterologists. They self-infected with hookworm. And then they would swallow this pill cam to see what happened, and I think they like took like 100 larvae. They took a lot. I'm surprised they didn't report worse symptoms, but they always found that each person ended up with the same number of adult hookworm, and it was like 15 for one and like 7 for the other, or something like that. And the one who ended up with 7 was the one who had horrible symptoms. The one who ended up with 15 hardly felt it. So that tells you that there's whether it was genetic or epigenetic or developmental. One person's immune system was like a little bit higher gear, and they're the ones who felt it the worst. So to your point about me having one of those immune systems, um, yeah, I agree.
So let me ask you, since the book, have you continued in this kind of pursuit of this sort of information? Are you still on that arc? Are you still?
Yeah, I write about it. Sure, I write. I mean, I write about it a lot. It's also just hot science, even though I think there's now like a backlash against the microbiome stuff
Yeah.
that's brewing because it's like everyone's saying, "Oh God, the microbiome. It can't be everything that's the microbiome. We can't blame everything on the microbiome." And I agree with that, but I also think that it's interesting stuff. I mean, the way I see it is like science has just woken up to this. They call it the forgotten organ. I mean, science has woken up to this thing that was there all along. It's partly driven by new technology that allows them to see it better. Uh, but this thing, it's been sitting there all along. It definitely has an effect. And already we see some sort of the low-hanging fruit, the fecal transplants for C. diff. I mean, there are people who are alive because they had poop from someone else put in their bowel. And that's the only reason they're alive. I mean, that's worth just remembering. And then there's the other thing, the wasting disease that kids who are malnourished develop. And so they basically they'll be malnourished, they're wasted, they're skinny, and then they'll start feeding them food, and then a lot of these kids never recovered. They would give them food, and they would just never recover. So they did these studies on the microbiome of this condition, this wasting condition, and what they found was that the microbiome itself was fostering this wasting.
Oh, wow.
They took it to mice, and the easy way to treat it was antibiotics. So now they treat those kids with antibiotics. So they can correct this whole wasting thing. So those are like two examples of things that are real. Those are real, I guess, steps towards curing horrific diseases, which are it's no joke. So we'll see about the more subtle stuff, but I suspect more will come.
And so, okay, so what's your, are you working on another book about this? Like, what's on the horizon that we can look for from you? Because I think you have a really good grasp of this.
I will continue to cover it as it develops. I'm not working another book on this. Maybe something related. I don't know yet. I haven't decided. I had a piece that was going to come out in a major magazine and then got killed. This is what happened in journalism. But it was about this idea of the ancestral microbiome, and hopefully I'll place it somewhere else. So that hopefully will be out at some point. And I'll keep writing on it. I mean, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Moises. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And again, I love the book.
Thanks. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, and I think and you echoed that point that probably the best or the most important audience at this point for the book is before you're pregnant or when you're pregnant. And again, I almost wish obstetricians would read this so that they can let parents know.
Yeah.
Think about it. I'm not saying go work on a farm, but maybe go visit it a couple weekends. Go just stand in there and breathe the air, and it's not going to hurt you.
Well, you don't know that though. That's the problem. So the reason it's important for these things to be tested is that, so let's say you are actually stimulating the immune system by going on the farm. There's these studies. They're a little bit unnerving, but where occasional exposure to livestock actually fosters allergies.
Oh.
And the thinking is that it's like getting this occasional revving up actually increases the risk of being sensitized, but getting a chronic stimulation is a totally different thing. So like those kinds of nuances, we need to understand those, because I would hate it if people, for example, if you were like, oh, I'm pregnant, I'm going to go get a hookworm infection. And then, getting, first of all, a Westerner who's never had an infection, who goes and gets one during pregnancy, there's like different cycles, there's different phases of the infection. Like when you first get it, it's very pro-inflammatory, right? It's not the same as if you've had it for a long time. Number one. Number two, as a Westerner, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get this nice immune modulation. You might have a reaction like me and leave you worse off. You know what I mean? So like, I would like to impress upon anyone who hears this that this stuff needs to be tested, because we're playing with potentially very important switches in the immune system, and you could just as easily make things worse. with some of these stimuli. Now, there are people testing probiotics, like sort of more classical lactobacilli, during pregnancy, and some of them show preventive effect. And then, sure enough, some of them show that those kids end up with more allergies. So there you have it. Like, it's just not clear what's going on yet. But I wouldn't recommend that. What I would recommend is just eating a good diet. By which I mean like a Mediterranean style diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of sort of healthy fats, nuts, and fish, as long as you don't have a lot of mercury. Because there's two reasons. One is because a lot of the phytonutrients, those oils, they're good for you directly, and secondly, because a lot of the phytonutrients and the fiber in particular, that pretty clearly fosters a more healthy community of microbes. So you're getting a two-hit sort of thing. And it's more, I think more importantly, lots of people around the world eat this way, and they're the ones who we're all trying to emulate because they live longer, they have fewer diseases, so it's like more proven than some of this other stuff. That would be my recommendation, which is so boring, I know, but
no, but it's not. It's important, and I'm glad that you corrected me on that then, because I wasn't aware of the studies that show, intermittent exposure could actually make things worse. So it's good. It's almost like, it actually makes me feel not less responsible,
yeah.
but less like I have to look back in time and go, wow, it's what I did when I was pregnant. I should have gone and milked cows, and I should have gotten a worm. But you're right. I'm a Western person. I didn't grow up in those elements. And so it's also plausible that I needed to have grown up in those elements from a young age for me to reap the benefits for my child. Yeah,
that's right. And if it's true that these things affect those switches, it's also true that they could push the switches in the wrong way, Yeah. So if it's true that they modulate your immune system, they could incorrectly modulate your immune system. So we need to know how to do it safely and correctly, because the cost of it going badly is actually pretty high. You don't want to have an immune system that's getting pushed in the wrong direction while you're sick. It's a risk factor for developmental disorders and for all sorts of things, for increasing the risk of allergy. I'm sorry, did I say while you're sick, while you're pregnant is what I meant.
Yeah.
So yeah, one thing I would say though, one thing I'd hope people would take away from the book is that like if you have an allergic disease or if you have an autoimmune disease, the genetic tendencies that underlie these disorders helped us survive in other environments, and that's why we have these genetic tendencies. So it doesn't mean that you're a sickly person. What it means is that you're a person who was better at fighting off something in the past, and that you're just in an environment where that sort of firepower increases the risk of self-attack or inappropriate immune response. Now, but it's another way. It sort of alleviates this idea like, what's wrong with me? Well, nothing's wrong with you. We've just evolved in a very different world, than the one we currently inhabit. And so that's what the problem is, that the world has changed.
That makes sense. And yeah. Well, is there anything else that I missed that you want to cover?
No, I think that's it. I actually have to do another talk to someone in a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Moises.
Bye.
Bye.